So I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. This webinar is entitled Transitioning into Adulthood with FASD, Perspectives from Research and Lived Experience. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'm just going to give another minute for people to join. So my name is Kirsten Morrison, and I am a research assistant with CanFASD. We did have another host today. She's having a bit of technical difficulties, so I'm taking over for now. But I do a variety of things at CanFASD, one of them being organizing these webinars for you all to enjoy. And so I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. So an important step in reconciliation is the acknowledgement of traditional treaty lands and recognition for the people of the territory. The Canada FASD Research Network recognizes the historical significance and contributions of Indigenous peoples and their cultures and understands the important role that the Indigenous community plays today and in the future. We acknowledge that we live, work, and meet on traditional territories across Canada of many of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So with that, I would like to introduce our first presenter. So our first presenter today is Alex Erlacher-Lalone. Alex is 27 years old and is currently attending the CICE program at St. Lawrence College. This is a program for students with disabilities that offers special support and modifications. She was diagnosed with FASD as a teenager, and she has 2 siblings and 2 nieces that she spends a lot of time with, and she's also involved in her church. So Alex is going to share a little bit about her experience as someone with FASD that's transitioned into adulthood. And I'm going to ask her a few questions to help kind of guide this conversation today. So Alex, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I don't really know where to begin with that. Because you basically covered most of it in that intro, so yeah. Well, I guess I could add the little tidbit that I got ordained as a minister online, but that's
That's
about it.
exciting.
Yeah.
What about a little bit about your family and kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, my family's full of the creative types. My mom's an art teacher. My dad has an art degree, but he also he worked for the Dairy Commission for a while. Now he's a counselor, and my brother's always tinkering with something. So, and then I've got my little old granny skills of knitting and crocheting. So, yeah.
Very fun. Um, how about what did you do after high school?
After high school, I attended Algonquin College for the Police Foundations program back in 2014. Um, I was doing pretty well until we discovered that I was not, simply because back then Algonquin College used a student portal called Blackboard. That was not the most user-friendly, and most of my assignments were to be submitted through Blackboard, and it was saying my work was submitted, but then it turns out my professors were not getting anything, so that didn't end up very well.
That is very stressful, it sounds like. um, do you want to tell us a little bit about your current college program and maybe some of the accommodations, the modifications that you use?
Okay, well, so for the CICE program, or Community Integration Through Cooperative Education, like you mentioned earlier, is a program for students with disabilities. And so basically it allows us to pick and choose programs from other, well, not programs, but classes from other programs. And they will modify that class's curriculum to fit your disabilities. So say, for example, you can't do tests, you're usually opted out of the exam or given the option to write an essay or make a presentation instead. As well as we all get learning specialists who will attend each class with us, and for some they'll take notes for us. They'll help walk us through like the classes before and when tutorials that we get. They're called tutorials, and they're just to help us prepare for class. Um, which is actually really great. So, yeah, and the program also is like focused has a focus on field placements. So, to help you get as much actual real world experience as possible to assist in getting a job later.
And what's your placement now?
My placement is at a local dog groomer called the Groomery, and it's a lot of fun. Learning some interesting things that I didn't know about different dog breeds as well as the industry itself.
That does sound fun. I love dogs.
Me too.
How have you found this program different than your other schooling?
Um, well, at Algonquin College, they do have, some supports, but it's more difficult to get the level of support that I needed. They have learning specialists, but you have to book an appointment, and you typically can only really get in once a month. And then there's, they have the assistive technologies, but then again, you have to book appointments for that. And but like at this program here at St. Lawrence, they 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 guide you through it every single step right off the bat before like classes even start, and they hook you up with like learning specialists. And it's great because like there's that one-on-one assistance not only with classes but like for life outside of your classes as well. Like we even have like one learning specialist who's dedicated to like early morning reminders, like, hey, don't forget to take your meds or something, whatever it is you need. They're there to help, which is really great.
So they support you in more than just the schoolwork and that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you like living in residence, and has it made you feel more independent?
Yes, it's definitely made me feel more independent, and it's definitely a change because it's weird because, so used to living with my family and whatnot. There are some nights where it's like dead asleep and I can't remember if I'm in my dorm room or my bedroom at home, and it throws me for a loop. And but like overall, residence has been a great experience because it's not only forced me to be more independent, but it's also forced me to like keep up with like keeping my room clean, doing my dishes, taking care of whatever it is I need. And basic life skills that I'm going to need later on, as well as residents. Like the people in residence are just so supportive and helpful with one another, and it's just a great and like wholesome environment.
That sounds really great. Um, what kind of jobs have you done, whether currently or in the past? And can you tell us a bit about some maybe challenges or successes that you've had with them?
Well, in the past, I worked a handful of, summer jobs, mostly like in restaurants because I had taken a culinary program at Algonquin College, which was the Indigenous Cook Pre-Apprenticeship Program, which is part of the Truth and Reconciliation Act. And, so free tuition, free textbooks, basically free everything. And it's a lot more fun than mainstream cooking because you learn the history behind the Aboriginal dishes and why they're done the way they are. So I worked as a line cook or a prep cook in several locations. Those were some interesting, like learning like the kitchen dynamics, like are like it's stressful, but it's also can be a lot of fun. It's very hot though. I don't recommend doing it in the summer at all. It gets so hot that it feels like outside is air conditioned.
Hmm.
So yeah, and you're wearing those long, heavy uniforms. But then I also worked a couple of years off and on as a gate attendant at a water park, as well as a slide attendant. Ooh, that was I gotta say, the slide attendant job has probably been my absolute favorite. And then I also worked at a grocery store for a while. That was it was a little difficult, like getting it across, like about my disabilities and whatnot. I have sometimes have difficulty expressing myself and advocating for myself. But a lot of the times, like even when I give them like a sheet, it's just a singular sheet of information. They get it in their heads. So like, oh well, my kid has this too, so I know exactly how to deal with this. When in reality, our disabilities affect us as individually as our fingerprints. So what works for their kid isn't necessarily going to work for like me or the next person. And so, their lack of empathy made it rather difficult to get the support I needed.
That's a very good point. So have you felt that the program you're in now with school has helped with that?
A whole lot, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because like they understand how, you know, differently we're affected, whether we have the same disability as someone else or not. And they really take the time to get to know you and how it works and how best to help you as an individual instead of like, just using general information.
right. Yeah. I understand that you have had some health problems that would sometimes take a month or so to recover from. Can you speak a bit more about that?
Well, so like for several years, I'd get this really bad cough, that would be triggered by a cold. So I'd already be sick for 2 weeks or whatever with a cold, and then I'd get this really nasty cough, which would be like a 2-minute coughing fit, 2-second reprieve all day, all night for anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks. So that made, going to school or work like completely impossible for those times. So I've had to drop out of several post-secondary programs because of it, and it was unfortunate, but it is what it is. But thankfully, I haven't gotten sick like that since the pandemic. So who knew all it would take to cure a mystery cough is a global pandemic.
That is good to hear. But I can see how that can affect like schooling and work and make it even more difficult to do those things. Um, I know that I think you do some things for your physical wellness now. Can you speak a bit more to that?
Um, Yeah, like I'm not the greatest at it, but I do try my best to eat healthy. Unfortunately, I love my bread, so that's a difficult one. But I try to make sure like I have prepped and like cook healthy meals. I'm a big fan of Cajun vegetable stir fry. That's really good. And on top of that, I've made it a point to work out like daily. So whether that's going to the gym with my new friends or just working out in my room, like it feels like when I work out, have the energy to get through the day and I don't feel like crashing come noon. So, and it also helps with the blood flow to the brain and, it helps with my classes and, because I'm able to think more clearly.
For sure, it gives a bit more focus. For, that's great. Do you want to actually speak a bit more about your FASD diagnosis and kind of how it specifically affects you on a day-to-day basis?
Um, it's a little hard to explain exactly how like it affects me on a day-to-day basis. But like I do know that like I have trouble reading social cues a lot of the times, and sometimes like I don't always say the most appropriate thing for the moment, which tends to get me in trouble a lot. And for the most part, I sometimes like I have trouble translating my thoughts into words, like spoken or written, and so I've taken up, you know, writing fan fiction as a sort of therapy for that. Um, what else is there? Oh yeah, sometimes I can end up, a simple question can feel like a personal attack, and I'm more of a fight person when it comes to fight or flight, and so I will snap back but in reality I really don't mean to. So
Right.
and that makes social situations difficult sometimes.
Do you find there's been a difference between um, understanding your diagnosis as a child and then as an adult and kind of the effects it's had through the stages of life?
Um, a little bit. I mean, when I first got my diagnosis, I was 15, I think. I'm guesstimating here. I was in grade 9 at the time. So that's about 15, right? And well, like I didn't really understand what it meant to you know, to have FASD and, like I knew what caused it, but I didn't know like how I was affected until I started attending or like my mom started attending different like meetings about it and getting as much information as possible and we actually started looking more into the different effects and you know and saying oh yeah see that's what happens to me sometimes or this is how I feel and so narrowing down you know and so now I feel like I have a much better understanding of how I'm affected and it helps me feel a lot more comfortable with who I am as a person because of that understanding.
Have you found there's any difference in supports through, say, when you were in high school and kind of figuring things out a bit more to now being more independent on your own?
Definitely for sure because in high school, they had no idea what to do with me. Um, like I did decently academically, socially not so much, and all they really have for support in high school is like a quiet room for writing tests. And that was also like quite similar to how it was at Algonquin. It's just quiet room, separate test kind of thing. And like I got a lot of support from my mom. Like I said, she attended all sorts of meetings and got all sorts of information from different sources and research and so that's helped with my understanding and but it's the most support I've gotten, I'd have to say, would be my mom, my church, and St. Lawrence College. So, yeah.
That's great to hear. I'm glad that you've been able to find the support that's worked for you and what you've needed. Um, have you found there's been some that you've learned some helpful strategies over the years? So things like medicine or exercise or changing up your workload.
Yeah. Definitely like I had a lot of trouble finding like the right mix of medications because I just have to be that one weird person where they don't work the way they're supposed to. But like I found a good combination that's worked pretty well for me and definitely the working out and trying to keep on a set routine or schedule is like probably the biggest help that I've ever had because when there's a change in my routine or my schedule, I no longer know what to do with myself, and that's typically when like I can act out in a negative way.
Right. So keeping a consistent kind of schedule and regime is helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I have two questions left for you.
Okay.
First one is what advice would you give other young adults with FASD?
Well, uh, sounding like a cliche older person, listen to your parents. I know you don't want to, and it sounds like they're nagging, but sometimes like they usually know what's best for you and but sometimes hearing it from someone else can really help you internalize it and think things through a bit more. As well as don't be afraid to ask for help, like with anything, whether it's because you don't understand or it's just something you can't figure out how to do. and I understand that want to be independent, the need to like figure it out yourself, but it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's a sign of strength. That
It's a
sounds
great point. No, they're cliches for a reason. They work. Um, okay, last question. Do you have any advice for parents of children with FASD?
I think that's something you should ask my mom, honestly. Because I'm not a parent, so I don't really know how to speak on that behalf. But like I think it's important to understand that we don't always mean to act out when we do act out. We're just sometimes it could be some sort of like just a mental overload, or we're still processing. So sometimes so yeah, just understanding that we don't always mean it.
I think that's great, and I think it's great that that came from your perspective, to be honest. So,
Yeah.
um, thank you very much for sharing your story with us and your experiences with us. I'm going to introduce our next presenter now. So, our next presenter is Lauren Nat. Lauren is a master's student in the community psychology program at Wilfrid Laurier University. Her research has allowed her to work collaboratively with organizational members from the New Brunswick FASD Center of Excellence. Together, they will investigate the transition from childhood to adulthood for adults with FASD to understand what factors enable adults with FASD to reach their goals. Lauren uses strength-based, person-centered, and humanistic approaches in her research to amplify the voices of those most affected by FASD, including individuals with FASD and their caregivers. She is passionate about conducting research driven by the community and focused on taking actionable steps towards positive change that align with the needs and desires of its members. So with that, Lauren, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great introduction. Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Lauren. Thank you for having me here to speak. Um, yeah, so I'll just get into it. As some of you might know, there's not a lot of information out there on how to support adults with FASD in navigating the transition to adulthood, and even less information that describes how they can use their strengths and capabilities to thrive in adulthood. Therefore, for my master's research project, I'm currently speaking with adults with FASD and their support people to understand what the transition to adulthood looks like for adults with FASD and what supports could benefit them in their transition. My goal for this research is to share the living experiences of adults with FASD and their support people, identify what is needed to help adults navigate and thrive in adulthood, and to provide recommendations to key stakeholders ranging from adults themselves to FASD organizations to government policymakers to help build supports and policies for navigating this time. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to do. So starting with some background and context on my research, then going over my research questions and objectives. Then I'll talk a bit about the methodology, which is currently where I'm at. And then I'll talk briefly about the preliminary findings, as I'm currently in the process of interviewing, but I've done analysis on a few transcripts, so I'll talk a bit more about that. And then some conclusions and implications based on what I have so far. So background and context. As many of you might know, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD, is a lifelong condition that impacts the brain and the body of a person prenatally exposed to alcohol. Adults with FASD may have a positive or negative transition into adulthood, depending on the context and influences around the person. Therefore, the goal of my research is to explore the interpersonal and environmental factors that influence an adult with FASD's transition into adulthood. Specifically, I decided to use the Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory because it helps us see that being a person is complex, and there are many different things that influence people's behavior and how they navigate adulthood. This theory helps us understand how different factors, such as people, objects, places, institutions, and societal norms affect our growth and development, ranging from our immediate environments of who we are and who we interact with directly to our broader societal context. So just breaking it down, the first level is the individual level, which looks at factors like a person's age, gender, health conditions, and for someone with FASD, it might also be the neuropsychological impacts of FASD. Then there is the microsystem level, which are the people, objects, places, and institutions that we interact with directly. This would be things like family, friends, schools, teachers, and bosses. And it can include both good things like supportive romantic partners and bad things like exclusion from peers. The mesosystem level looks at how the different parts of our microsystem connect. So for example, how parents and social workers get along impacts the individual at the center. The exosystem looks at the factors in our environment that influence our lives, but we do not directly interact with. For example, we are not involved in developing university policies, but they still affect the access to and quality of education. The largest system is the macro system, which is comprised of the cultural and societal laws, government rules, cultural beliefs, and economic systems that impact all levels of the model. For example, negative stigmas about people with FASD can lead to biases from institutions, peers, educators, and other factors. Lastly, the chronosystem is about how time and history play a role in our lives. For example, FASD was talked about much differently 20 years ago compared to now. So when looking at the transition to adulthood for adults with FASD through this lens, I discovered two major gaps. Firstly, there needs to be more information about what goes right in the transition to adulthood and which factors can help adults thrive in adulthood. As well, there are a lack of services and supports for adults with FASD, despite their needs being unmet, and that is documented in the previous literature. Therefore, there needs to be more information about what kinds of support they need at each of those levels to help us create recommendations, services, and policies that lead to a more supportive environment for individuals with FASD to thrive in adulthood. So that leads me to my research questions and objectives. The main research question I am asking is how adults with FASD and the people supporting them describe the adult's transition into adulthood, and what supports benefit them or would be beneficial for them in that transition. For my objectives, my first one is to give voice to adults with FASD and their support people. Secondly, my goal is to identify the interpersonal and environmental factors that were either positive or negative influences on the adult during this transitional period, and then provide recommendations to key stakeholders based on those findings. So moving on to the methodology. For this study, I'm currently recruiting adults with FASD ages 19 plus who live in Canada, and people who support adults with FASD, either formally or informally. I recruited participants across Canada through people and organizations supporting individuals with FASD, and I will finish recruitment once I reach data saturation. So currently I'm in the stage of conducting online semi-structured Zoom interviews. Each interview usually lasts about 30 to 60 minutes and is meant to feel more like a conversation than an interview because my main goal is just to learn from the participants. And all the people who participate receive a $50 compensation. Afterwards, my next steps will now be sending participants their transcripts and offering them an optional member check-in call where they can clarify their thoughts and ideas or add more information. After that, I will continue to extract themes from the data that reflect the experiences of adults with FASD and their support people. So as I mentioned before, preliminary findings, I'm in the process of looking at the data, so this is just what I have so far. So far, I've been able to speak with 7 adults with FASD and 11 people who support them. The adults with FASD, who either took part in the study or were discussed by a support person, ranged in age from 19 to 38, with the majority being between 21 and 30 years old. So far, it has been evenly split between male and female participants, with one participant identifying as non-binary. Within the support people, so far, I have a diverse group that includes parents, siblings, grandparents, and social workers who support adults with FASD. So now getting into the results. So far, I've analyzed about 6 interviews, so I still have a way to go, but the way I'm going to explain these results are through each of the Bronfenbrenner's ecological levels, and I'll explain what I know so far about what the transition looks like for the participants and what has been beneficial. And interestingly, where I saw the most influence was the microsystem level, which could be because those are the factors that impact them the most. So starting with the individual level, participants told me that FASD is a spectrum disorder that impacts everyone differently. The impacts for the participants included challenges with organization, memory issues, and most of the support people mentioned difficulties with social competencies, and that the adults learn through observation and habit building rather than by being told information. I also got information about the strengths, capabilities, and interests of adults, which included being kind, athletic, being great at writing and photography, and thinking outside the box. So the recommendations from participants for managing and thriving when it came to challenges with organization and time management is to 1, have someone be an external brain, as they called it, who can help with decision making, managing money, and staying on track for things like getting up for work, eating, and cleaning. Secondly, some participants expressed regret for not learning or teaching social competency, daily living tasks, and employment skills before the adult turned 18. Therefore, they recommended the early development of life skills, routines, and organizational strategies for adults with FASD. When it came to strengths and passions, participants mentioned the importance of finding what they're good at and capable of, and then getting assistance with the tasks that just don't play to their strengths as well. In addition, they also talked about finding a career path that builds on your strengths, passions, and interests, and that you feel confident that you can thrive in. Moving on to the microsystem. So these are all the people and places that were most commonly identified in the microsystem. As you can see, there are a lot of factors that were brought up from the microsystem in just the few interviews I analyzed. So I'll touch on a few, and then if you want to know more about any of them, please reach out to me or ask questions in the chat. So starting with the support people, there were many things mentioned that support people did to benefit adults in the transition. For example, it was recommended that adults have a network of support moving into their adult life, but have at least one consistent, trustworthy individual as their primary support for important tasks like managing money and looking after safety. However, support people who were also parents said that they found it hard to support their children because they considered themselves to be independent and didn't want help. Thus, they said that they wish they had more training and more supports for how to navigate the transition. For example, having training on how to get messages across regarding factors like interdependence and promoting that. When it came to the workplace, adults had positive experiences with bosses who were FASD informed and understood how to help the adult thrive. For example, understanding what one of the participants needed, it looked like giving them a task and assigning it piece by piece instead of giving them an entire list to make sure they could get it all done. As well, participants had mixed feelings about telling their bosses about having FASD because they worried that they would get fired before their 3-month probationary period was over. As well, leading into the transition, adults benefited significantly from having an educational system that was trained in supporting people with FASD to help tutor them and eventually help them get into college and universities. Once they were in university, there were mixed results. Adults whose programs understood their needs and adjusted the program delivery for them thrived in college and university. However, the adults who did not have support from their college or university dropped out, with one mentioning that she wished she had a social worker to help her with that transition. Moving on to the mesosystem. So for the mesosystem, the support participants highlighted these relationships as important. So the relationship between primary supports and teachers, and then the relationship between primary supports and social workers. So several support people have shared how they served as advocates to teachers about the adults' needs since their school days. This approach was found to be helpful for improving the students' experience. Social workers and guardians also emphasize the importance of having a supportive, positive relationship with one another, where the social worker provides care to the guardian, and the guardian helps the social worker understand how to best support the individual with FASD and the entire family. On to the exosystem. According to some participants, their healthcare providers were unaware that their physical symptoms were associated with FASD. While some saw assisted living or interdependent housing as an ideal solution for the person they support, other participants mentioned being excluded from assisted housing because they were considered too high functioning. It was also clear from participants that many of them believed that there was a limited amount of support services in Ontario and they did not know where to find them. Therefore, they mentioned that there needs to be more training and implementation of FASD-informed practices for healthcare workers and institutions to ensure that doctors understand the symptoms of FASD and how to manage those health impacts associated with FASD. There also needs to be more training for people who operate and manage assisted living spaces so that they understand that FASD is a spectrum, and the best way to support adults is by asking them what their specific needs are, because nobody has the exact same needs. Lastly, the participants also discussed wanting a directory to find where all the supports were, and also wanting more government funding to build and expand existing programs that only serve children. Onto the macro system. Lastly, a theme that has come up is that adults with FASD are being compared to and held to the same standard as neurotypical adults, which has led to challenges such as support people not being allowed to attend appointments with them, being taken off parental benefits after turning 19, and losing childhood supports because needing support as an adult is not as widely recognized, despite the fact that every person needs support. Therefore, they mention that there needs to be policy that considers that not everybody's chronological age matches their developmental stage. This idea came up a few times of stage, not age. And needing support should not be seen as shameful. Everybody needs support, regardless of having FASD or not. Everybody lives interdependently, so they really emphasize the importance of embracing that notion, which actually came from support people and adults with FASD. So conclusions and implications. Once I have everything done and I'm ready to wrap it up, for the final steps, participants will have the option to participate in a 30 to 60-minute group call to review findings and drafts of knowledge mobilization materials to ensure that these materials reflect their voices and living experiences. It is then important to share this information with a wide range of audiences because there are many key stakeholders, such as individuals with FASD, support people, educators, healthcare providers, and policy makers that can use this information to better support adults with FASD during this transition. I plan to disseminate these findings through various channels, including academic journals, social media platforms, policy proposals, summary reports, and conferences, so that these key themes can be used by adults themselves and stakeholders to promote thriving for adults with FASD in the transition to adulthood. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. Currently where we're at is recruitment is still happening. So I mentioned that we have 7 participants with FASD who've done it so far and 11 support people. So we're really trying to get just a few more participants with FASD just to really capture all the experiences, although it's impossible to capture them all. But if you are interested in participating or you have anyone who is, you know of anyone who is, please reach out to me. Here's my email. And also, if you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to chat more with you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. It was a great presentation, and I feel like I saw a lot of parallels between what you're finding in your research and what we just heard from Alex. So that's really great to hear, and I'm excited to see where it takes you.
Yeah,
So I'm going to take a minute, and our who we would have had to host at the beginning has joined us. So Marcia Wilson is here. I don't know if you want to say a couple of words, Marcia.
Hi. Thank you for your understanding today. Zoom and I were having a big fight, and for a while Zoom was winning, but ta-da, I have a great support service team, kind of like somebody with FASD who needs a go-to person. My computer service techs were able to get me to join the group. Hi, everybody. I just caught the last bit of Lauren's presentation. I'm sorry that I missed our self-advocate because I learned so much, so I'll look forward to looking at the taping of this. I'm a parent. I have a son who's 37. I also work in private practice with families who are helping their loved ones through transition planning. And Lauren, I'm familiar with the model that you're using as a basis for your research. So I would say well done. And I appreciate the way that you are taking out the nuggets from what your participants have shared to date, because I think it's going to be very meaningful work. So thanks, everybody.
I think I will wrap up our webinar for today. I want to have a big thank you to our presenters today, both Lauren and Alex, for sharing their research and their experiences. And I want to thank each of you for joining us today and hope you will continue to join us for future webinars. So to get more information on CanFASD and stay in the know with respect to all our upcoming webinars, please check out our website at www.canfasd.ca or follow us on our social media channels to find more resources. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of this Friday and your weekend.